Welcome to Discovering the Ancient Paths. I am Pastor Mark Biltz of El Shaddai Ministries. We meet every Saturday morning in Tacoma, Washington from 10 a.m. to 12:30. One of the most exciting things we do is to look at the New Testament through the lens of the culture during the very days of the Messiah. We also go through the Torah, or the first 5 books of Moses, throughout the entire year, dividing it into 52 sections, so over the year, all 5 books are covered. Remember after the resurrection, on the road to Emmaus, how the disciples' hearts were burning as Jesus opened up the Old Testament to them in ways they had never seen. That's what we do every week. Join us on the journey of your life right here at El Shaddai Ministries, meeting every Saturday morning right here in Tacoma, Washington from 10 a.m. to 12:30. We'll see you there. So a big Shabbat Shalom to all of you. That's right. What we're going to be talking about today is the grand opening ceremony of the tabernacle. This is the big day. When you think about the Genesis, when God created the heavens and the earth, he's in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve sinned, they're kicked out of the garden. Okay, God's presence is basically gone. This is the first time in history where God's presence is going to be manifested physically, where people can see it through the Shekinah glory cloud. So this is a big day. This is what the book is talking about. And I don't know if you knew this, but Leviticus is the first book of the Torah that are taught to Jewish children at 3 years old. Now, when we think of Leviticus, what do we think of? Blood flying everywhere, sacrifices, all of this kind of thing. And people wonder, why in the world, would you start the book of Leviticus with 3-year-old kids? And one of the things they say is that Leviticus, first off, is the very heart of the Torah. We know blood flows through the heart, but this is the heart of the Torah. And they say it's all about purity, it's all about holiness, and children need to learn it when they're pure and holy. Waiting till adulthood is kind of late. But the interesting thing is when we think about Leviticus, the word blood appears about 70 times in Leviticus. And now, here's how Leviticus 1:1 begins. And you can see from right to left. The Aleph, what does the Aleph stand for in this picture? 1. Oops, let me come back to this. There. Okay, the Aleph is the first verse of Leviticus 1. And you can see it says Vayikra, which is basically, the Vav is what I want you to notice. You have, in English, like in the beginning is 3 words, but Breshit is 1 word. Okay? Well, here, the Vav, who knows what the letter Vav, what word that is in English? And. The Vav is and. It's a conjunction. You can see it looks kind of like a nail. And what does a nail do? It connects 2 boards together. And in Hebrew, the Vav is the word and, because it's like a conjunction. It's like a nail connecting 2 things. And so the very fact that it begins with and then the other part of that is to call out, or and called out. What do we know when a sentence begins with the word and? What are you supposed to look for? What's it connected to? It's connected to the last verse of Genesis. So in other words, really, Leviticus, or to Exodus, so Leviticus is connected back to Exodus. And Exodus is connected to Genesis. So it's kind of like it's one long book. But here it says, and called out El to, and then the Moshe, or Moses, via Daber, the word of the Yud He Vav He. So just a little quick lesson in that. But you know what's amazing is this is not exactly what it looks like in a Torah scroll. But what I want to bring out, first off, is this Leviticus 1 is connected to Exodus 40. And Exodus 40 is talking about the tabernacle going up on the 1st of Nisan. So we have to realize Leviticus now is on the 1st of Nisan. It's a continuation of that very same day. Okay, but here's the thing that's interesting. It says, and the Lord called to Moses, is how we have it in English. Now, how come it doesn't say, and Elohim called to Moses? Why is it the Lord called to Moses? What's the difference? Well, when we think of the sacrificial system, the pagans would always sacrifice to their gods, right? But they're doing it out of fear. Well, the word Elohim, which is used in Genesis in creation, implies God as judge. Elohim is judge. He's the Almighty. He's the King when he created everything. But in Genesis 2, when he creates Adam and Eve, it's now not Elohim, it's Yehovah Elohim, or the Lord God. And God's name as Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh represents mercy, love, compassion. And so once Adam and Eve sin, we now see God is introduced as the loving Elohim, the merciful Elohim. How many of us know if we had our relationship with God was based only on strict judgment, none of us could stand? Right? Okay. Well, never in the entire book of Leviticus, when it talks about all the sacrifices, never is Elohim used. It's always the Yehovah, the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. It's the loving, merciful God that is presenting the need to do the sacrifices, not Elohim as a mad, powerful God demanding sacrifice. And so I think that's very important, because the idea that offerings were needed to pacify some bloodthirsty God was foreign to Judaism. And that's important. We think that, boy, if God will be happy if I just kill an animal. The whole concept was actually to draw near, Korban, to draw near in your relationship to a merciful God. And so how many of you know, even like a border wall can mean two things to two different people? Well, it's the same thing with sacrifices. Much of Christianity has always thought of the sacrifices as God is bloodthirsty, demanding some animal. If some animal will just be killed, he'll be happy. But that was totally foreign. It's never been that way in Judaism. It's always how to draw closer to a loving God. And we're going to talk about that more in a little bit. And so here we have the word, and the Lord called to Moses. Okay, so we're really dissecting this verse. I first wanted to show you how the word "and" connected it to the offerings on the first day. I wanted to talk to you about how it is the Lord who's calling out to Moses. It's not Elohim. And now I want to concentrate on the word Moses as well. And I think my little PowerPoint here is a little messed up. But Vayikra, but it's not really that way. What it really looks like is this. Let me go back. The Vav is the word "and" called. All right. So here you have Vayikra. I want to show you this next. Notice it doesn't say Vayikra. It says Vayikra. In Numbers 23:16, it has the Aleph is completely missing at the end. Do you see that? There's no Aleph at the end. Vayikra is the Lord calling out to Moses. But in Numbers 23:16, the Aleph is missing when the Lord calls out to Balaam. So what is the difference on the Aleph? Let me go back and show you again. Vayikra is how it was. See the Aleph on the end? Okay, but here it's missing. It's no longer Vayikra, it's Vayikra with the letter Aleph missing. Well, the difference basically is this. When the Torah describes the Lord speaking to Balaam, it uses this word implying it happened by chance. With Moses, he's specifically speaking to Moses. But in Numbers 23:16, when he's speaking to Balaam, it just happens by chance. It also gives the idea of contamination. Okay, so on the other hand, when God wished to record in the Torah that when he spoke to Moses, he called him lovingly first. And that's why he told Moses to write Vayikra. But Moses didn't want to write Vayikra. So in every Hebrew text, the Aleph is made very small. Now, why is it? It's like this tiny little letter. And they say it's because Moses was so humble, he did not want to make everyone think that God would personally want to call him out. You know, how many of us, if the president calls or whatever, hey, guess what, everybody, the president called me or something. But for Moses, he wasn't that way. Here the Lord calls out to him personally, trying to draw near. And Moses was so humble, he said, oh, well, let me make the letter small then. He wanted to get rid of it and have it be like when the Lord called Balaam as well. But that, again, just shows us how humble Moses was. So, our Torah portion today is all about the dedication of the tabernacle. We know the fire falls from heaven lighting the altar, but we also know, can you imagine on the grand opening ceremony, Aaron's 2 sons die? Wow, how horrible. I mean, that kind of spoils the party. You know, here all of a sudden Nadab and Abihu die. But the other thing I want to point out is, many people aren't aware of, everything in the book of Leviticus happened in a 30-day time period. The entire book of Leviticus is within the month of Nisan, 30 days. Now, when we go back and we think Exodus, remember the Exodus? They leave Egypt. They camp about a year around Mount Sinai. So basically, we find Exodus takes place in 1 year, from the time they left Egypt to the time of Shavuot, and now they're trying to go conquer the Promised Land. Well, the book of Leviticus is just the first month of the second year. That's all it is. And Deuteronomy also takes place in just 30 days. It's the last month of Moses' life. So when you think about it, from those 40 years, 38 years we hear nothing about. Yeah, I mean, we think we can read Exodus through Deuteronomy. We know all about what happened in the wilderness. No, you know what happened in 2 months, a year and 2 months of the 40 years. So there's really a whole lot that we don't know. Now, if we go back to Exodus 40, verse 1 and 2, since that's what it's connected to for a minute, it says, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, on the first day of the first month, you're to set up the tabernacle. How many of you know that is not January 1st? Okay, so if you're not on God's calendar, you're going to be disoriented on when this happened. The first day of the first month is the first of what month? Nisan. That's exactly right. So Passover is 2 weeks away. So what do we find here? Let's go back to Leviticus 1, 2 through 4. Oh, I think I gave the wrong notes to Jill, but that's okay. She has my notes and I have hers. But get a load of this. It says, speak to the children of Israel and tell them, when any of you offers an offering to the Lord. Now, does anyone know what that Hebrew word for offering is there? Korban, exactly. And it means to draw near. He says, you shall offer your offering of the livestock from the herd and from the flock. If his offering is an offering from the herd, oh, thank you so much, kind sir. You're a gentleman and a scholar. Okay. It says, if this offering is an offering from the herd, he shall offer a male without blemish. He shall offer it at the door of the tent of meeting, that he may be accepted before the Lord. He shall lay his hand on the head of the burnt offering, and he shall be accepted for him to make what? So here we are talking about a blood sacrifice of an animal, and this is on the first day of the first month, and he's trading them about animal sacrifices and how it's to make an atonement for him. Now, the word atonement, we need to understand, means covering. It basically means a covering. And you know what's amazing is here, think about this. We're going to be talking about the different type of sacrifices, okay? We're going to find that, let's see, Leviticus 1 is all about the burnt offerings. Leviticus 2, that whole chapter is about the grain offerings. Leviticus 3 is all about the peace offerings. Leviticus 4 is all about the sin offering, and Leviticus 5 is all about the guilt offering. So each chapter is devoted to one of the offerings as it's broken down. And here we're going to see sometimes the blood is splashed on the altar. Sometimes the blood is just sprinkled on the altar. Sometimes the blood is poured on the altar. So, each one, what's this big deal about throwing all the blood all over the altar? Well, when you think about blood being splashed, when was the first time blood was splashed? When it comes to the covenant, to God's covenant with Israel. Well, that was when they put the blood on the doorposts, okay? But what's amazing, when you go to Exodus 24, this isn't on your notes, verse 6 through 8, this is at Mount Sinai, and it's before the sin of the golden calf. Moses is read the entire book of the law, and they all said, we will do it, right? And it says Moses has the Levites do animal sacrifice, and they collect all the blood, and then they divide the blood in half, and he takes half of the blood, and he pours it all over the altar. Okay? And then everyone says, everything the Lord has said we will do. And guess what he does with the rest of the blood? He throws it on everybody. Everyone that's standing there, it says he throws the blood on the people. I used to work on the kill floor of a slaughtering house where they killed hogs. There'd be like 1,000, 2,000 pound sows. Okay, these gigantic hogs, and they would always kind of shock them to kind of knock them out. And they'd go down this big conveyor belt, kind of gassing them. And then they come out of this around the corner on this big conveyor belt with all these rolls. And then the guy next to me would take them all and turn them all one direction. So all their legs are pointing this way. Okay? And sometimes they'd come to and jump off, and there'd be this big guy with a pipe and clunk them in the head, and then we'd have to pick them up and put them back on the conveyor belt. Yeah, and then the guy next to him would have this knife, and he'd cut their throats, so the blood's just pouring out, and then it's my turn. Okay? And I'm standing there, and I'm just in these rubber boots on concrete floor with an apron. The blood is pouring out, and I have to collect the blood samples and test tubes to check for brucellosis. Okay, so I'm standing in the slaughterhouse, blood pouring all over the place, and I'm the one that's collecting all the blood, putting them in sample tubes, taking them home, running all these tests. I lasted about 30 days, about the month of Leviticus. I said, I'm out of here. But what's interesting, let me ask you guys something. Why did God do that? Why did God throw the blood all over the people? It's bad enough throwing it on the altar, but how would you like to have blood thrown all over you at the same time? Hey, blood belongs on the inside, not the outside. Let me ask you something. We're body, soul, and spirit. Where's your soul? Where's your soul? What's the Hebrew word for soul? Nephesh? The life of the flesh is in the blood. And the word life is soul there in Hebrew. Your soul is in your blood. What? Okay, now what happens when you lose your blood? Okay, give you an example. All right, and this is why, and if you write this verse down, this also isn't on your notes, but Leviticus 17:11, it says, don't eat the blood of the animal. Its soul is in the blood. But the amazing thing to me, we are brought near because of the blood of Messiah. Okay, it's his life that was given for us, that why we can draw near. And so the whole concept of blood, we think of life and death, and I think this was the pattern that God was showing. It says he loved us first, right? That's why he made the first sacrifice. The whole concept of the sacrifice was to show us how we can draw near because Messiah was shedding his life for us. And now he says, will you shed your life for me? And so that's why we're to bring the offerings, is to say we acknowledge that your life, your blood was shed for us. So we want to draw near to you. Now we know you don't want us to commit suicide, so we're going to lay the hands on the animal. And so that's why Christians need to have a better idea of what the whole purpose of the sacrifices were and the offerings were. It was to draw near. It was to acknowledge his sacrifice for our life. And now, like Romans 12:1 says, we're to offer ourselves up as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. So it really puts a whole new light on the sacrificial system. Now, here's the other thing we need to realize. The sacrifices represent the possibility for us to demonstrate our love for God. A korban, or an offering in the Hebrew mindset, is not a sacrifice as if we have to give something up. It's not an offering as in bringing a gift to the gods. It literally just means to draw near. And so these are what are necessary for a person to get closer to God. So in the temple, Israel would take the animal parts and elevate them on the altar to God. I mean, how many think about this for a minute? What kind of God needs offerings from us? How many of you know God doesn't need our offerings? All right. Do you think God wants the offering as a bribe? How many of you think God's into bribing people? I don't think so. So he won't be angry with us. How many of you know we can't offer our own good deeds for protection anyway? All right, so this is what we need to understand about the sacrifices. The whole idea of atonement means to cover. All right, kind of like a credit card covers you until the bill gets paid. The credit card doesn't pay it. I mean, you got to pay off the credit card. Well, it's all about covering. And listen to Isaiah chapter 30, verse 1. Woe to the rebellious children, says the Lord, that take counsel, but not of me, and that cover with a covering, but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin. What did Adam and Eve do? They tried to cover themselves with some leaves. Didn't work real good. And all too often, if we try to cover our sins up without using the covering that God gives us, we're in trouble. Look at Micah 6:6-8. And you have to understand, this is someone who is whining. Okay, Micah is talking about the whiners here. Here's someone whining, saying, wherewith shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? Am I supposed to come with him with burnt offerings, with calves of a year old? And then the prophet comes back. Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams or with 10,000s of rivers of oil? He doesn't need that. And then the person says, am I supposed to give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? And the prophet responds, look, he showed you, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires. Just do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. All right, so that's the sacrificial system wasn't to some kind of a bloodthirsty God needing a bribe or needing a good steak. He didn't need that. Look at Isaiah 40, verse 15 and 16. God says, behold, the nations are a drop in the bucket. They're counted as the small dust of the balance. He takes up the isles as a very little thing. Lebanon, with all of its forest, basically, is not sufficient to burn, nor the beasts thereof sufficient for a burnt offering. In other words, God is saying, look, I don't need this. He's not doing it for him. He's doing it for them. I've mentioned this many times before. Who loves who more? Okay? Do parents love their children far more than children love their parents? Always. Why? Because the children are the one who the parents are the ones who are investing into their children. Investing into the children. The children don't invest into the parents. They don't have anything. Okay? It's kind of sweet when your child wants to give the parent some money. Thank you. Okay, I'll take it, or whatever, but you pat them on the head. All right. God wanted the sacrifices not for him, for us, because he knew if we invested our resources into him, we would love him. That's why we give offerings. That's why we tithe. Because it's like God says or let's say a parent says to the child, here's $10. And then the child says, well, I want to give you $1 back. All right, well, guess what? It wasn't the kid's money due to begin with anyway. And the whole concept of giving back to the Lord is you're saying, look, I want to invest in you. How many of you know God's the best investment anyway? All right. But so anyway, that's the whole concept of the sacrificial system, is to have us incur some cost in drawing near to God, because then we would develop a love relationship for him. Okay. So the first 7 chapters of Leviticus actually describe 5 different classifications of sacrifices. And almost all of these were accompanied with wine or water libations as well. But here's the thing to realize. The first are free will or voluntary offerings to enhance the relationship with God. The second type are mandatory offerings for the rectification of sin and to mend the relationship. So the ones that are mandatory require the individual to acknowledge that they have some responsibility for what happened. And within Judaism and the sacrificial system, when it comes to those, repentance and restitution was always required. Now, what many don't realize is like 99% of the offerings that were brought every day, they weren't for sin. It had nothing to do with sin. There was your free will offering as far as your burnt offering, which is the first thing we're going to talk about. Now, your burnt offering is the only offering that was completely dedicated to God. In other words, some of the offerings, the offerer would get part of it, and the priest would get part of it. Some of the offerings, the priest got all of it, and you got none of it. And some of the offerings, the priest nor the offerer got any of it. Well, that is the olah offering or the burnt offering. Can you imagine? I mean, how many of you know we have all different levels of wealth in society? Some people with no money, some people with a lot of money. And the burnt offering had nothing to do with the price of the offering. It had to do with giving your all to God. Now, how many of you have ever bought a side of beef? How many of you ever bought the whole cow? All right. How many of you know it's expensive? How many of you would ever want to just burn money? That doesn't make sense. But that's what they did. The burnt offering, they would buy a bull or a cow, and no one got one steak. The priest didn't get anything. The person who offered it didn't get anything. The whole thing just got burned up to God. And it had nothing to do with sin. It was a free will offering. Okay? Now, let's say you can't afford a bull, but you can afford a little bird, maybe a pigeon or something. Well, guess what? You could offer that whole pigeon. And what's fascinating is, as you read the Torah, they said, whatever you do, don't pluck everything off to make it look like they're not offering anything. Make them realize they're offering something, But it was the concept of offering all you had. That's why the widow's mite was actually more than what all the other people, bigwigs, that put all the money in. God wasn't concerned with the amount because he doesn't need the amount. He just wants to know if you were all in or not. And so here, they would just offer everything up. Now, the reason why I say all this is, of what value is it for believers to say that Messiah fulfilled all the sacrifices when they don't really know anything about the sacrifices? We need to really understand it. Now, the Jews never thought they had to earn their salvation through works or sacrifices. That may come as a shock. I'll say it again. Jews never believed that they had to earn their salvation by works or the sacrificial system. So many Christians think, well, that's works. You're trying to earn your salvation. But they never thought they earned their salvation by works. Or you're just doing the sacrifices to atone for your sins. They didn't do the sacrifices to atone for their sins. That may come as a shock. But almost all the sacrificial system was to draw near to God. That was its purpose. And the sacrifice itself wasn't about death. It was about life. The death of the unblemished animal was just the means by which its lifeblood could represent ours on the altar. And so this is all comes as a shock to a lot of people when they realize the sacrifices weren't for sins. Especially when you read Ezekiel and realize during a millennial reign, when Yeshua's here for 1,000 years and he rebuilds the temple, they're going to institute animal sacrifice again. Now that shocks most Christians. What? Why are they instituting animal sacrifices again? Well, how many of you have eaten a hamburger the last month? Okay, if you're willing to kill the cow to eat the hamburger, what's wrong with killing the cow to, have dinner with the Lord? But let's go to Leviticus 1, verse 14 through 17. It says, if his offering to the Lord is a burnt offering of birds, here it is, he shall offer his offering of turtle doves or of young pigeons. The priest will bring it to the altar, wring off its head, burn it on the altar. Its blood will be drained out on the side of the altar. He'll take away its crop with its filth and cast it beside the altar on the east part in the place of the ashes. And then he says, he shall tear it by its wings, but don't divide it. The priest shall burn it on the altar on the wood. It's a burnt offering. But he doesn't want the bird to be divided because then it'd be too small. Well, I can't believe how fast time flew. But then you have the grain offering. And so the grain offering was more of a memorial portion. Is where you share a meal with God. Leviticus 2, 1 and 2. If anyone brings a grain offering to the Lord, his offering is to be of fine flour. In Leviticus 2, 4, we also see that the unleavened cakes and unleavened wafers had to be anointed with oil, just like the matzah is anointed. And the Hebrew word for anointed is the Messiah, Mashiach, who is broken and shared among the priests, with God receiving a memorial portion. And this is why in 1 Corinthians 11:24, it talks about Messiah giving thanks. What did he do? He broke the unleavened bread, and he said, take it and eat it. This is my body, which is broken, and it is to be done for a memorial. Passover is a peace offering, which is the next offering. In Leviticus 3, 1 and 2, it talks about the sacrifice of the peace offerings. And also the priests were to sprinkle the blood all around the altar. Well, Romans 5:1 says we're justified by faith and we have peace with God through the Messiah. And then finally, next is the sin offering or the kata offering. Now, here's the thing, that this is sins of ignorance. It's not willful sins. This was for sins of ignorance. Look at Leviticus 4, 1 through 3. The Lord says to Moses, speak to the children of Israel, saying, if anyone sins, how? Unintentionally, then they had to bring the sin offering. Did you know there were no offerings for intentional sins? There were no daily offerings for intentional sins. And the reason why is, if there was an offering for intentional sin, then God would be saying, it's okay to do intentional sins. In other words, if I say, boy, if I kill Bob, I'm in big trouble with God. Oh, no, I'm not. He just wants me to kill 7 cows and 2 turtle doves, and I'm good with God. Are you following me? That's why there could never be, never, sacrifices for intentional sins. This is why Christians don't understand the whole sacrificial system, thinking it's done away with. Well, it's because it had nothing to do with intentional sins. Now, then, in Hebrews 10:4, look at this. It is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats should take away sins. Well, guess what? That's not a surprise to the Jews. They knew that. We act like that's some surprise, like they thought it did. No, they never thought that. So then we have the guilt offering. And this is a restitution of damages done to someone else that required a monetary payment. Now, how many of you have ever been in a car accident and it was your fault? But it was called an accident. You didn't intentionally back into that car. All right? Well, that's what the guilt offerings were. It's when things were done unintentionally, but it incurred a cost and you had to make it right. And so it's called a trespass offering in Leviticus 5, 14 through 16. Look at verse 17. If a soul sins and has done that which ought not to be done, anyone from all the commands of the Lord and what? Does not know. Okay, then he brings the trespass offering. The priest makes atonement for his ignorance in which he erred without knowing, and it shall be what? Forgiven him. And this is why the Lord, when he was on the cross, says, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. He was putting their sin as a sin of ignorance with consequences, okay? And then in Leviticus 16:22, it's talking about the atonement, talking about atonement. This is when they had the scapegoat that they would take out into the wilderness and they'd throw it over the cliff. And in Leviticus 16:29, it was to be a statute forever. On the 10th day of the 7th month, they're to afflict their souls. And in Ezekiel 43, 1 through 4, is when he brings them to the eastern gate, and he has a vision, and the glory of the God of Israel is coming from the way of the east. His voice is like many waters, and the glory of the Lord is coming. And then in Ezekiel 44, 1 and 2, he brings them back to that same gate looking toward the east, and it was shut. And the Lord said, it won't be open, no man shall enter, because the God of Israel has entered in by it. And in Ezekiel 45, 18 through 11 is our last verse. Look at this. This is of the new temple. Thus says the Lord God, in the first month, the first day of the month. Ooh, what happened? That's our Torah portion. The building of the tabernacle. And it says this is what's going to happen. And this is when Messiah is here and there's a new temple. He says you're going to take a young bull without blemish. You're going to cleanse the sanctuary. The priest will take the blood of the sin offering, put it on the doorposts of the house, the four corners of the ledge, the post of the gate, the inner court. You shall do on the 7th day of the month for everyone who errs, for him who is simple, to make atonement for the house. The first month, the 14th day of the month, that's Passover. You shall have the Passover feast 7 days. Unleavened bread shall not be eaten. And so here, we're going to still keep Passover. But Messiah is going to be here to eat it with us. And so anyway, I hope I tweaked your mind a little bit and made you think from things from another perspective. But when we understand that the sacrifices weren't for sin, they were to draw near to God, then we'd have a better understanding of what's coming. You know, I was just looking, and again, it always amazes me, but we had almost 500 cities around the world live streaming with us this last hour. So we want to give all of the live streamers a big thank you. You know, I'm thinking a lot of these could be new people who have never heard of El Shaddai before, who are just coming on because of the release of the book. And we want them to know, all those new people that might be live streaming, that, hey, you're part of the family. Amen, aren't they? That's right. We're just so grateful. Okay, now, where are we going? We're looking at the new covenant, which is known as the Brit Hadashah. And we're going to be talking about the book of Luke and the book of Acts. And how many of you know Luke wrote the book of Acts? That's what's thought of. I want to go over this handout that I had. I don't know how many of you brought it this week. But when you're reading the New Testament and hear about Herod, and all of a sudden you realize, you know, there were like 6 different Herods. You know, we're talking about Herod Antipas, which is in Matthew 6:22, Herod Philip in Matthew 14:3, Herod Archelaus in Matthew 2:22, or Herod the Great in Matthew 2:1. Right in the book of Matthew are 4 completely different Herods. So we can see if we don't understand that, how we can be somewhat confused. And then we find later on there's a Herod Agrippa the first in Acts 12. And then in Acts 25, there's a Herod Agrippa the second. And you see in blue, I have all of the Roman emperors. And then you can see Pontius Pilate, and after him came Felix, and then Festus. So you can kind of see where Mark Antony and Cleopatra, I just kind of have some historical things in there to help us get an idea of who some of these people are we're going to be talking about. We see that where you see Felix, Drusilla is the daughter of Herod Agrippa the first, and she's the sister to Herod Agrippa the second. So anyway, I just kind of have that there because as we go through Luke, as we go through Acts and you read about the different Herods, this will just kind of give you a heads up of the time frame. But let's go to Luke chapter 3. We ended 1 and 2 basically, and we're just highlighting some verses in this study. But verse 1 and 2, we see that it was in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. Pontius Pilate was the governor, and Herod, being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip was the tetrarch of the region of these other places. And we see the high priesthood was of Annas and Caiaphas. Isn't that interesting? How can there be 2 high priests? That was all messed up back then. And it says the word of God came to John, otherwise his biblical name was Yochanan. God is gracious. He was the son of Zacharias. And where is he? He is in the wilderness. Isn't that amazing? We need to realize God speaks to us in the wilderness. How many of you know you can't see the stars at night with all the city lights? Well, sometimes, how can you hear God with all the noises going around you? It's not that he's not speaking. It's just there's too much noise going on. So we need to sometimes get away into the wilderness. And when we see John 1, verse 19 through 22, I want to tie John in here with Luke so we can get the whole picture, because each gospel writer kind of spoke a little bit about the events that were going on. Here we see that John the Baptist, or the Yochanan the Immerser, was in the wilderness. And it says there that, now this is the testimony of John, when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" And he confessed, and he did not deny, but he confessed that I am not the Mashiach, or the Messiah. And they asked him, "Well, then what then? Are you Elijah?" And he said, "No." Then, "Are you the prophet?" And he said, "No." So they said to him, "Well, who are you? You know, if you're not the Messiah, you're not Elijah, you're not the prophet spoken of by Moses, who in the world are you? That we may give an answer to those who sent us. What do you have to say about yourself?" Okay, now what's fascinating about this, what time of year was this happening on the biblical calendar? Does anyone know what time of year, what biblical month? Okay, this was the month of Elul. He's preaching repentance in the wilderness. The month of Elul is known as the month of repentance, okay? Right before Tishri, which is the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Kippur, the Feast of Tabernacles. So it's the 6th month on the biblical calendar, the month of Elul, just before Tishri, the Day of Atonement. And so they're preaching repentance. Now, I believe this happened on Elul, right around Elul 1. Because what does he do? How many days was Yeshua in the wilderness? 40 days. He comes to John on the 1st of Elul, and then he goes 40 days into the wilderness. And guess what comes 40 days after the month of Elul? Yom Kippur. So the 1st of Elul is the same day Moses went up to receive the second set of tablets. He comes down on Yom Kippur saying atonement's been made. On the 1st of Elul, John is in the wilderness. On the 1st of Elul, Yeshua goes into the wilderness for 40 days, coming down just like Moses on Yom Kippur. Now, let's look at Luke 3, verse 3 and 4. John comes to the region all around about the Jordan, and he's preaching the baptism of repentance unto remission of sins, as it is written in the book of the words of who? So we're going to go to Isaiah. And he says, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make ready the way of the Lord, make his paths straight. All right, now how many of you have heard of the 9th of Av? Okay, that's the 5th month. What month comes after Av? Elul. Okay, so here, during Jesus' day, the temple had already been destroyed in 586 BC on the 9th of Av. For 600 years, okay, has already happened, and they've been fasting on the 9th of Av for, 600 years. Now, they have the Torah, and then we also read what's called the Haftorah, which means the section from the prophets that fit the Torah readings for that day. And so you have the 3 weeks of mourning, or the dire straits, right, that begin on the 17th of Tammuz when they worship the golden calf, and then it ends on the 9th of Av with the destruction of the temple. The next 3 weeks are called what? The readings of comfort. Now God is comforting Zion. And this is leading up to the month of Elul, the couple weeks right going into the month of Elul. And look what we find in Isaiah 40. Why do you think Yeshua is reading from Isaiah? Because it's the Haftorah portion. Okay? But anyway, let's start though with here, it's Elul, and John the Baptist is preaching, and look at Isaiah 41:2. Right after the ninth of Av, leading up to the month of Elul, they're reading. Look at this. Comfort ye my people, says your God. Speak comfortably to Jerusalem. Cry to her that her warfare is accomplished, her iniquity is pardoned. She's received of Jehovah's hand double for all of her sins. Now, when was Isaiah written? About the 8th century BC, 700 something BC. So John is quoting something that was written 700 years earlier. How many know 700 years from now is a long time ago? Okay, in our mind, think 700 years ago, puts it in the 1300s or whatever. That's how far back John is thinking when he's quoting Isaiah during his day. Now, when it comes to when was the Haftorah reading started, when did they start reading from the Haftorah? Some ascribe it to Ezra in the year 350 BC is when they started reading a Haftorah section with the Torah. And then some people say, no, it happened around Hanukkah, 168 BC, when the Jews were under the rule of Antiochus Epiphanes, okay, of Hanukkah infamy. And here's the reason why. They say they were forbidden to read from the Torah, but they still could read from the Haftorah. And so they would read from the Haftorah since they were forbidden to read from the Torah, and because the decree was limited to the 5 books of Moses. So the sages instituted that a section of the prophets should be read instead, which was related to the Torah readings that should be read every week. Well, Isaiah 40 is the Haftorah portion read after the dire straits, that's happening right at the month of Elul. And so what do we see now in Luke 3, 5, and 6? The reason why I'm sharing you with this is when you understand the Hebraic roots, you need to tie what John is speaking back to Isaiah so you can get the whole picture. Watch how this unfolds. It's incredible. Okay, we know he's quoting Isaiah. Luke 3, 5, and 6, he says, every valley shall be filled, every mountain and hill brought low, the crooked places will be made straight, and the rough way smooth, and all flesh shall see the salvation of God. Did you catch that? All flesh shall see Yeshua. What's the Hebrew word for salvation? Yeshua. Okay, now let's go back to Isaiah chapter 40, verse 4 and 5. Let's see what he was quoting. Every valley will be lifted up, every mountain and hill will be made low, the rugged shall be made level, the rough places a plain. And it says, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. Well, guess what? There's no it in ancient Hebrew. This actually should be, the glory of the Lord should be revealed, and all flesh shall see him. That's what he's saying. Now, let's go back to Isaiah 40 also. Look at the next verses 8 and 9. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever. Who is the word of God? Yeshua. So he's reading not just the verses we read in the New Testament, but he's reading this whole section. And he says, O Zion, you who bring the good news, get high up into the mountain, O Jerusalem, you who bring the good news. Lift up your voice with strength. Lift it up. Be not afraid. Say to the cities of Judah, behold your God. And what did John say? Behold the Lamb. Look at John 1:14, concerning the word of our God stands forever. What is he saying in John 1:14? The word became what? Flesh. He dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, which is what Isaiah 40 is saying. The glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Let's go back to Luke 3:23. Yeshua himself began his ministry at about how old? 30 years old. So that means it was almost his birthday. If we realize he was born in the month of Tishri at Sukkot, he comes out of the wilderness on Yom Kippur, beginning his ministry it's almost his 30th birthday. You following me? If he's born on Tishri 15, he comes out of the wilderness on Tishri 10, he's almost 30 years of age. Does that make sense? Now, how many years did he minister? 3.5 years. 3.5 years. Okay, so if he began his ministry in tabernacles, he ministers 3.5 years. A half year later, puts him dying at Passover. And when did he die? On Passover. And this is why he was not born at Passover. If he was born at Passover, beginning his ministry 3.5 years, that would have him dying at the Feast of Tabernacles. It's just common sense. He couldn't have been born at Passover. He had to be born on the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, now, Luke 4, 1 and 2. Then Yeshua, being filled with the Holy Spirit, returns from the Jordan, was led by the Spirit of the wilderness, being tempted for how many days? He went into the wilderness on Elul 1, 40 days being tempted. He comes out on Yom Kippur. And look at verse 3 and 4 of Luke 4. Here the devil says to him, if you are the Son of God. He didn't say you are the Son of God. He said, if you are the Son of God, command the stone to become bread. But Yeshua answered him, saying, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word of God. You know what the devil was trying to do? He was trying to attack his identity. Guess what? It's the same pattern. That's what the devil does to you. He tries to attack your identity. If you really think you're a Christian, or if you this, or if that. And this is where you have to respond with the word of God. Look at Luke 4, 16 through 20. He comes to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day. So Yeshua's custom was to be in the synagogue on the Sabbath day. He stood up to read, and he was handed the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, the Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. He sent me to heal the brokenhearted, proclaim liberty to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Then he closes the book, he gives it back to the attendant, he sits down, and all the eyes of everyone who's in the synagogue were fixed upon him. Wow. Well, you know what's fascinating? He's reading from the next chapter. Well, Isaiah chapter 61 now. Okay, so John was reading from Isaiah 40. Now, Yeshua is reading from Isaiah 61. That's what he's quoting. But let's look at what all it really says. He closes with verse 2 here. But look at this. He came to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. But then it says, and the day of vengeance of our God. He doesn't say that. He stops with proclaiming the acceptable year of the Lord. Why? Because the day of vengeance wasn't coming for another 2,000 years. You following me? Okay, so that's why he stops it right there. And guess what? When is the Jubilee to be proclaimed? On Yom Kippur. Okay? Now, so what do we see? He comes out of the wilderness. It's Yom Kippur. He proclaims the acceptable year of the Lord. Now, I'm not sure if that was the Shemitah year. That you proclaim liberty is both on the Shemitah as well as on the Jubilee year. But here he's proclaiming the acceptable year of the Lord. But I wanted you to notice he doesn't declare the day of vengeance. It's setting the prisoners who are in jail free, which is one of the reasons John the Baptist says, okay, if that's true, what about me? Okay. But let's look at Luke 4, 21 to 22. Everyone's watching him now. And he began to say to them, today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. So all bore witness to him. They marveled at the gracious words which were proceeding out of his mouth. And they said, is this not Joseph's son? Okay, here they say, oh, Jesus, you're so gracious and kind. And then he opens his mouth again. And he says, and guess what? Many lepers were in Israel in the time of Elijah, the prophet, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman, the Syrian. So all those in the synagogue, when they heard these things, were filled with wrath, and they rose up and threw him out of the city. They led him to the brow of the hill on which their city was built, that they might throw him down over the cliff. And passing through the midst of them, he went his way. Well, guess what? It's Yom Kippur. And what did they do on Yom Kippur? They take the scapegoat out to the cliff and throw it over the cliff. But it wasn't his time yet. And so what does he do? In verse 31, he goes from Nazareth down to Capernaum, a city of Galilee, and it was teaching them on the Sabbath. So if we want to be like Yeshua, what do? We come on the Sabbath. Look at verse 38. And this is interesting. And I'm going to make this very real to you here. He's in Capernaum, and it says he arose from the synagogue, and what did he do? That kind of means Simon's house is next to the synagogue. Okay? How many of you have been to Capernaum? Okay. Well, you know what I'm talking about. Those who have not, take a look at that. You see that structure there that's more white. That is the ancient synagogue. Now, last week I showed you it was built on top of the very synagogue that Yeshua was in with the black stone. Right in front of it where that big circular thing is, that's an archaeological site protecting what's underneath that they believe was Simon Peter's house. And look how close it was to the Sea of Galilee. Right there. I mean, he was a fisherman. And so there you have the ancient synagogue. Right there was Peter's house. And then right there was the Sea of Galilee. Luke 5, verse 12. Luke 4:38. He arose from the synagogue, entered Simon's house. But Simon's wife's mother was sick with a high fever. And they made a request of him concerning her, so that he ends up healing her. Luke 5, 12 through 14. It goes on in the next chapter to say that it happened, look at this, while he was in one of the cities, behold, there was a man full of what? Here's that leprosy story. And when this leper saw Yeshua, he fell on his face and he begged him, saying, Lord, if you want to, you can make me what? Very important. It wasn't, you can heal me. See, we Christians get healing and cleansing combined. No. He said, he didn't say you can heal me. He said, you can make me clean. But guess what? You can't be made clean until you're healed. So in other words, he's saying, I know you can complete the whole process. You can not only heal me, you can also cleanse me. This is huge. Watch as this unfolds here. And so the Lord stretches out his hand, and what did he do? Oh my goodness, he touched the leper before he was healed. That's going to make him unclean. Well, guess what? He took all of our uncleanness upon him. And it says immediately after he said, be made clean, the leprosy left him. And then he commanded him, don't tell anybody, but go your way and show yourself to who? And offer for your cleansing according to what Moses commanded for a testimony to who? That is huge. And look what he said. He said, you don't have to do what Moses says because I've overridden Moses. No, Yeshua said, you go do what Moses says.
Thank you for joining with us. We hope you learned something new today. Please partner with us in fulfilling the scriptures about taking God's Torah to the nations. You can watch this whole program for free, along with all of our other archive programs right from our website link shown below. We hope to see you soon at our location right here in Tacoma, Washington. See you soon.